Emily, is Grandpa doing okay? Patricia, yes, he's doing okay, but not perfectly. It's a bit of a hassle when older people hurt themselves. I wish they would consider how hard it is for us to take care of them. Patricia, that's not a very nice thing to say. It's alright he's not doing too well anyway. I'm not good at dealing with the needs of older people, but you're used to it, so you'll manage. The other day, my husband's grandpa, Michael, fell in the garden and hurt his leg. It's not too bad, but he's already 82 years old. Because of his age, we're making sure he stays in bed to avoid making it worse. My mother-in-law won't even go near him, let alone help take care of him. I'm Emily, 30 years old. I got married 3 years ago and live with my husband Daniel's family. My husband used to be my boss at the company where I worked, a company started by his grandpa. When I first joined 8 years ago, my father-in-law was already in charge and my grandpa-in-law was the chairman. But back then, the grandpa still handled all the big tasks and jobs in the company. 2 years ago, when Grandpa turned 80, he stayed as chairman but gave most of his public duties to my father-in-law. Michael, you've put in a lot of work over the years. Let Christopher handle the company stuff now and take it easy, my mother-in-law said with a smile. But to me, her words sounded kind of sarcastic. Grandpa-in-law can be stubborn, but he's known for being fair and kind. On the other hand, my father-in-law seems a bit immature. He doesn't speak his mind clearly and isn't as reliable as Grandpa. Plus, he always listens to whatever my mother-in-law says. My grandmother-in-law passed away before I met her. My husband and I started dating 3 years after I joined the company. He was leading our team with energy, and he seemed dependable, although a bit too sure of himself. Maybe I felt that way because I lost my dad early and grew up with just my mom. She passed away from illness 2 years ago, so now my in-laws are all I have left in terms of family. Not long after I got married, my mom got sick and needed me to take care of her, so I quit my job to be there for her. My husband's family didn't mind, and it might be because of one thing Grandpa said. It's only right to care for the mother who raised you alone. Don't worry, just take good care of her. Because of that, I could stay with my mom every day for a year without worrying about money until she passed away. My mother-in-law seemed a bit unhappy, but I was really thankful. But ever since Grandpa handed over the company to my father-in-law, things have been changing. People don't listen to Grandpa's ideas as much anymore, and I feel like they're not treating him with the same respect. At first, I thought it was just me imagining things, but seeing how my mother-in-law and husband act, it feels real. My father-in-law doesn't seem to care much, and it's like he's ignoring Grandpa now that he's basically retired. Seeing how my in-laws behave, I can't help but feel angry. Hey, Patricia, and you too, don't you think you're being a bit distant towards Grandpa? What's the problem? Grandpa tries to talk to you, and you barely answer him. You don't even try to help him out. I don't have time to deal with old people. You can take care of Grandpa. You're the one who's free. There's no need to speak like that. I'm tired from work. Don't bother me with trivial stuff. This is how it always is. No one listens to what I say, and my grandpa-in-law doesn't speak up to his family about it. Now I'm the only one who talks to him at home. Grandpa, it's a nice day today. How about we take a short walk outside? Your leg seems to be getting better, and it might be good for your recovery. Thanks. Let's go out for a bit then. We walked to the park together. Many families were there and children were playing happily. My grandfather-in-law watched them with a smile. Christopher and Daniel, just like those kids. Grandpa, I was so busy with work that I couldn't spend much time with the boys. Maybe that's why I feel like I didn't raise Christopher and Daniel properly, my grandfather-in-law said, sounding a bit sad, almost as if he was speaking to himself. Christopher is my father-in-law, and Daniel is my husband. I think about how we can all be kinder to my grandfather-in-law, but I can't think of a good solution. Then my in-laws suggested building a new house for him. This house is more than 50 years old, right? It's poorly laid out and hard to use. Instead of spending money on repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location. A new house. Michael is getting older, and while it's good he only got hurt last time, we never know what might happen in the future. So let's make the new house accessible for him, so we won't have trouble if he needs care. That makes sense. We can even put Michael's room in the middle so everyone can easily look after him. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. All right, it's settled then. And Michael, regarding the expenses. If it's a house for all of us, I'll cover it. Talk to Mr. Jones about the finances. Classic Michael, thank you. We really appreciate it, my mother-in-law said with a happy smile. It seems like they only praise him when they need money. But if everyone takes care of my grandfather-in-law after we move to the new house, I thought there couldn't be anything better. Mr. Jones is the company's legal advisor and also manages my grandfather-in-law's personal finances. My grandfather-in-law likes his honesty and has kept him around for almost 30 years. He's 58 now and the person my grandfather-in-law trusts the most. I've met him a few times and he seems really trustworthy. He's always concerned about my grandfather-in-law's health, and sometimes I feel like he cares for him more like a son than his real sons do. Knowing there are people like him around my grandfather-in-law gives me some comfort. I didn't know exactly what kind of house they were building or where it was going to be, but my mother-in-law seemed really happy, and the three of them were looking at interior design magazines and discussing things, so it seemed like everything was going well. Then something unexpected happened. It turned out that my grandfather-in-law had a debt of $1,820,000. Wait, what's this about $1,820,000? My grandfather-in-law had co-signed a loan for a friend's company, but that company ran into trouble, and now the debt fell on my grandfather-in-law. Wait, they're not going to take the house, right? It's still under construction. Since the contract is already done, and like Patricia said, it's in the president's name, so it's okay, my mother-in-law said with relief. Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad things turned out the way I suggested. Hearing that conversation, I realized for the first time that the house was in my father-in-law's name. Even though my grandfather-in-law had paid for it, it seemed like something my mother-in-law would do. I also wondered why they didn't consider giving up the house to help pay off the debt. Hey, this debt is Michael's responsibility, not ours or the company's, right? Well, it was signed under Michael's name. Oh, okay then, no problem. I couldn't see any good in the situation. But since my grandfather-in-law didn't say anything during that conversation, I didn't say anything either. After all, it's not an amount of money I could handle. Then, a few days later, my grandfather-in-law's behavior started to change slowly. Grandpa, what do you want for lunch? Who are you calling Grandpa? I'm only 50. You have no right to call me that. Huh. Sorry, Emily, right? I was lost in thought. At first, I thought he was just lost in his thoughts. But when it kept happening, I started to feel worried. Patricia, where's my food? What are you doing? Grandpa, I'm Emily. Patricia is your daughter-in-law. You already ate your meal. I didn't eat. Are you trying to starve me? I started to wonder if my grandfather-in-law's behavior change was triggered by the huge debt, and maybe the fact that none of his family members were trying to help him made it even harder for him. What could I do to help him? I tried to take him to the hospital, but he refused to go. Perhaps he didn't want to admit that he might have dementia. I didn't want to push him, but I felt powerless on my own. I talked to my husband about it, but he just said it wasn't his problem. I couldn't rely on my mother-in-law either, so I thought my father-in-law was my only option. Yeah, Patricia told me, Daniel. They suspect it might be dementia. Could you come to the hospital with us? But it's not that serious yet, right? If we go to the hospital, others will find out about my dad having dementia. There are medications now that can help slow down the progression. Well, there's no need to be in a hurry. Let's observe him a bit longer. Since Emily is here, everything will be fine, won't it? I couldn't shake the feeling of how unreliable these people were. I couldn't rely on them. Grandpa, let's go to the hospital. Let's get you checked out properly. Who are you? Where do you think you're taking me? You're plotting something. I almost cried, seeing how my once gentle grandfather-in-law had become so stubborn. But my mother-in-law just laughed, finding it amusing. Even if he used to be the chairman, his time is over now. Everything, even the company, belongs to Christopher. Patricia, Grandpa isn't completely out of it. He can hear everything. He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering, dribbling. Just the thought of it gives me chills. He's nothing but a burden now. How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for the family his whole life. My mother-in-law's words made me both angry and sad, but my grandfather-in-law simply smiled. See, this old man doesn't understand anything, Patricia, she said with a laugh. I was furious at my mother-in-law's callousness, but I held on to hope. Once we moved into the new house that Grandpa had helped build, maybe things would change. Maybe the family would show him gratitude and kindness. I couldn't completely let go of that faint hope. 2 months later, the house was finally finished. For days, I had been packing my in-laws' and husband's belongings while mine and my father-in-law's things remained mostly untouched. Every time I tried to pack my own things, I was given more tasks by my in-laws and husband, preventing me from making any progress. But I thought it would be okay to move the smaller items later since this house wasn't going anywhere. On moving day, after most of the stuff had been moved, I went to call my father-in-law, but my husband said, "Ah, you and Grandpa can stay here." "What? You want us to stay in this house?" "But we don't need any extra baggage in the new house. So from now on, you and Grandpa will live here, and I'll give you Grandpa's debt too." "Well, at least you can be a housekeeper. Come on, let's go." "Yeah, I'm coming. Good luck with paying off the debt and taking care of Grandpa." With those words, my in-laws cheerfully got into the car and drove off. I was stunned for a while. I couldn't immediately understand what had just happened. Were we just abandoned? And not just me, but my grandfather-in-law too. They were the only ones going to live in the new house. It took me a while to comprehend because it was beyond my imagination that someone could do something so cruel. When I went back into the room where my grandfather-in-law was, I felt okay about looking after him. That was my plan from the beginning. As I was getting ready to say something to him, he turned around suddenly as if he knew I was there. "Did they leave already?" he asked. His face looked very different from how it used to be just a few months ago. Honestly, he seemed like a different person. I started to say something, thinking maybe something had changed with his health. But then he smiled. His next words surprised me. "I was just talking to Mr. Jones, my grandfather-in-law. Did you finish firing the unnecessary staff, Chairman?" "Yes, all done. Shall we go?" Where are we going?" "To our new house, of course." I left my old house with my grandfather-in-law, not really understanding what was going on. The next month, I got a lot of calls from my mother-in-law and husband. My grandfather-in-law said he didn't want to talk to them anymore, but I picked up my husband's call because we were talking about getting a divorce. "Hey, Emily, is Grandpa with you?" When I went to the old house, it was up for sale. It's not worth $1,820,000, so you can't use it to pay off the debt. Is that why you left? What do you mean? Let me talk to Grandpa. Dad's not answering at all. That forgetful old man has done something crazy. I knew what my husband was talking about, but I wanted to hear his perspective. Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Because of that, the executive director became the biggest shareholder, and they held a shareholders meeting and a board meeting, and Dad got fired as president. But maybe Grandpa thought the executive director was the right person to run the company. The executive director must have tricked the old man into selling the stocks. This isn't right. You're getting something wrong. Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he seems more clear-headed than before. What? Until the day we moved, I had seriously believed that my grandfather-in-law had dementia. It turns out he had been suspicious since my mother-in-law mentioned building a house to live with him. So he came up with a plan. He pretended to have dementia to see how my in-laws and husband would react. And just as he expected, they revealed their true selves one by one. In the end, they abandoned my grandfather-in-law and me. I struggled to hold back my laughter because everything unfolded exactly as I predicted. My grandfather-in-law said, "I was surprised, relieved, and a bit conflicted." "To trick your enemy, you must first trick your allies," he chuckled. It seemed he had been getting updates on the company from the executive director and Mr. Jones. With my grandfather-in-law out of the picture, my father-in-law and husband did whatever they wanted, ignoring the opinions of the employees and using the company's funds for their own enjoyment. Even though my grandfather-in-law initially handed the company to my father-in-law, he became worried about the future and took this action. Ultimately, he decided he couldn't trust his son and left the company in the hands of the executive director. "What about the $1,820,000 debt?" my husband asked. "That's taken care of," I replied. It turned out my grandfather-in-law had guaranteed a loan for a friend's dad, but he had personal assets that covered it and more. After stepping back from the company, he invested in real estate and made a good profit. But if I had mentioned that, my mother-in-law and husband would have targeted it. That's why I only mentioned the debt. The friend's dad had helped my father-in-law in the past, and now the land he owned was going to be turned into a resort, fetching a high price. "You're joking," my husband exclaimed. "But are you guys okay? I asked. We're not okay. Both my father and I were ousted from the company. What do we do now? He worried. Well, there's also the mortgage on the house, I reminded him. What? What do you mean, the mortgage on the house? My husband asked, puzzled. Haven't you figured it out yet? Grandpa was supposed to cover all the house expenses. Maybe you don't remember what he said back then, I replied. When my mother-in-law discussed money with Grandpa, he made it clear that he would only pay if it's a house where everyone, including me, would live. Otherwise, he wouldn't contribute. Even though the house was in my father-in-law's name, Grandpa intended to pay only if everyone lived together. That's because you assumed Grandpa would foot the bill and didn't examine the documents properly, right? Christopher signed without checking everything. It shows he really didn't have the qualities of a president, I remarked. You're kidding, my husband exclaimed. Later on, my parents-in-law lost the house they had built because they couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments. Now they reside in a more than 50-year-old apartment, struggling to settle the unpaid loan. My mother-in-law and husband have been reaching out to me, suggesting we all live together, but that's not feasible anymore. My grandfather-in-law has retired from his chairman position and bought an old house in the countryside where we now live together. Emily, you're free to live wherever you want. You don't need to worry about living expenses, my grandfather-in-law assured me, but I chose to stay with him. If I'm not a bother, please let me stay by your side, I told him. When I expressed my feelings, tears filled my grandfather-in-law's eyes. Thanks to Mr. Jones, the divorce went through, and steps were taken to remove my ex-father-in-law and ex-husband from inheritance. I officially became my grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter. If anything happens to him, my father now, I'll be there for him till the end. Now we both find joy in working together in the fields. Dad, check out this radish. It's huge. Under the bright sunlight, we share warm moments. I wish for these days to last just a bit longer.